is gaining momentum, covering new areas. Russia appreciates the Islamic world represented by Mr. Taha, shows an independent stance and adheres to the principle of sovereignty of states and advocates constructive development of interstate relations based on international law and the UN Charter. We had a detailed discussion on topical issues, discussed our joint work to promote intercultural and interfaith dialogue. We've noted the successful organization of a number of events in Russia, which will be hoped to the sports capital, Kazan. And the Secretary General also has in his program the signing of a memorandum between Russia and the Organization of the Islamic Cooperation to develop ties in higher education and other humanitarian areas. We drew his attention to the situation in the fertilizer markets. We've shown how Western sanctions prevent countries which are part of the organization from receiving the goods from these categories, while Russian counterparties fulfill their obligations in full. We discussed the so-called package deal signed on the 22nd of June in Istanbul, which came to benefit countries which are not the poorest, and the poorest countries were only a small share of the beneficiaries of Ukrainian grain. And over 50% of Ukrainian grain has gone to EU countries. There is statistics provided by the United Nations proving this, and we discussed the initial design behind the grain deal and stressed that it must be brought to life, and that those most in need benefit from the deal. And the Western countries' sanctions complicate situation in the hydrocarbon markets, and they try to put pressure on the countries who produce oil and gas. While discussing the international agenda, we expressed our vision about the importance to respect the principle of equal and indivisible security, and that it is inadmissible to strengthen one's security at the expense of others. And here we drew attention to the Russian concept of ensuring security in the Persian Gulf. We also discussed important issues on the African agenda. Many African states are members of the OIC, and Mr. Taha is representative of Chad. We welcomed Africa as becoming one of the centers in the new multipolar structure of the world. And we discussed the conflicts and crises which persist in the world, and stressed the leading role of Islamic states in solving these crises based on the approach that African problems need African solutions. It is an approach that Russia has consistently advocated for at the UN Security Council, and we stand against attempts to impose external solutions on African states. On the request of my colleagues, we informed them about the progress of the special military operation in Ukraine, and we stressed that it is aimed at solving fundamental problems with the rights of Russian-speaking groups and populations in Ukraine, as well as others, And these talks have been very timely, and we agreed to keep up the contacts. Thank you.
Your Excellency, Minister, I'm grateful for organizing this press conference. It is true that this conference, this meeting, allows us to exchange opinions with the Minister of Foreign Affairs on various matters. If I'm not mistaken, we met in June or in May when he visited Riyadh on the invitation of the Persian Gulf Cooperation countries, participant countries. And for us, it was a chance, along with my Russian counterpart, to discuss various matters, various issues. And today we continued the discussion that we have started then. We reaffirmed our willingness to continue cooperation. We looked at the prospects of its development, and we talked about our common interests. Now, as you are well aware, Russia is engaged, is participating in a war. And us, as an Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, at the level of foreign ministers, we held a meeting, and the ministers asked us to intervene so that we could finally put an end to the war in this part of the world. We are talking about the participation of various participating countries like Turkey, United Arab Emirates, and other countries. All these countries are making efforts to find a peaceful resolution to this situation between Russia and Ukraine. Of course, we would like to see world leaving the war behind, and we all thought that we've left the war behind, but now we are appealing the world to stop the war in the best interests of all the peoples of this region. As you can see, obviously, what is happening now, it has consequences for Africa as well. Minister, you know that African nations, they are also suffering from this war. Hence, this war has a very negative long-term consequences for the entire world and for the most needy countries that are going through dire straits now on a daily basis while the war is ongoing. So we are hopeful that the war would be over. We also talked about the Palestinian issue with Minister, and we addressed Minister with a request so that Russia, that is a great power, could also intervene there to help the Palestinian people. They keep talking about the two-state solution, but in reality, nothing is happening. Maybe Russia could make an effort to put this two-state solution into practice, into reality, and thus we could help the Palestinian people who have the right to have their own state. That's why we made this request to the minister. We also talked about the peace in Yemen, the war in Yemen, and how the peace could be solidified there. So we share the same approach in this regard. The role of Saudi Arabia should be enhanced so that to bring back peace to the territory of Yemen. For several months now, we have seen some positive signals from there. It seemed that the hostilities were over, but nevertheless, we need to establish peace in there, and this peace is very fragile because it is under constant risk of the war breaking out again, and we also addressed Minister to intervene there so that we could encourage the parties to find a final solution to bring an end to the war in Yemen, because the people of Yemen is suffering. A lot of young people are losing their lives during the hostilities, and we hope that Russia could intervene to find a solution. There are other matters that we also talked about, for example, matter of the market. The matter of Rohingya. Rohingya is the people without a state. They live in Bangladesh, but there is a very important issue under current circumstances in the current world. Rohingya, they have no state, they have no country, they have no refuge. So we asked minister that maybe Russia could intervene to talk to Myanmar and to resolve the issues of these people. Thank you very much. Colleagues, now we have time to take your question. Iranian television. Good afternoon, Al-Halam TV channel. I'm sorry, I've got two questions. There is a big interest regarding the development of the economic cooperation between Russia and Organization of Islamic Cooperation. What are the plans, intentions, steps? And the second question, now we all know that in the world there are a lot of active, outstanding issues. So is there bilateral cooperation to support the Palestinian issue?
As to your first question regarding our plans on economic cooperation, we do have such plans. Russia is a regular participant in ministerial meetings of the OIC devoted to trade and economic cooperation. These meetings are held annually in Istanbul, and as I've said, we attend those meetings regularly. There are some events planned until the end of the year, including a meeting between the ministers of economy, finance, and information. And Russia will take part in all of these meetings. And of course, we support the OIC's desire to build our cooperation in science and education. As I already said, there will be a memorandum signed between our Ministry of Education and Science and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. It will be a great contribution to strengthening the foundation of our trade and economic ties in future. As to the Palestinian issue, we had a detailed discussion today. We think it necessary to stop the attempts to break down the international law framework and the attempts to prevent the two-state solution from happening. These attempts are indeed taking place, and the principles of the Arab peaceful initiatives, which was proposed by the King of Saudi Arabia in 2002, and that was approved by all the members of the OIC at the summit in Tehran. And these are being undermined, but we think it is our duty not to fall for such attempts and attempts to replace the two-state solution by economic support measures for Palestinians. And we pay special attention to the efforts that are currently being made to help Palestinians restore their unity. Russia has held several meetings with delegates from all Palestinian factions. Egypt, Algeria are also making similar efforts. I recently had productive contacts with those countries, and other countries of the OIC are active here as well. So we will continue this work, and I hope that we will be able to discuss the Palestinian question further, and so that the OIC stands up unified.
I think you are well aware that Russia has a status of an observer in OIC. So we are interested in tapping into this potential of relations between Russia and OIC. Russia is an important partner to us, so we hope that Russia will also take some steps in the name of peace, in the name of resolving such an important issue as the Palestinian issue. It has been on the agenda for years, but there was no solution to this issue. But we can see that with the support of Russia, if Russia will use all its international clout, so that Palestinians could finally implement their right to have a state, hopefully we will find a solution. OIC in the Islamic civilization is deeply rooted in the Russian society as well. And if we talk about the enhancement of the security of the Russian Federation, the Islamic world played an important part. There are a lot of Muslims living in Russia, and they actively participate in the civic activities and the public life. So Islamic civilization in Russia has been known for a long time now, and we hope that now we have the chance to mobilize our cooperation. Today we are going to sign this agreement on developing technical education, first of all. And here again, Russia has huge expertise, and I told that minister when I was young, all Africans traveled to Russia to get education here. That's where they were coming to get a degree in engineering or in medicine and in technology. The same happened. I think that after we signed this agreement, we could launch our cooperation and we could use Russian expertise, Russian competences. After signing this agreement, we will see what steps can be taken by us. Because often poverty is the cradle of extremism, and one has to do everything possible to stop terrorists from recruiting new participants, new members into their ranks. And that's where Russia is well known as an experienced actor in this regard. Hopefully, here Russia as well could have helped us to develop in our anti-terrorist activities. Thank you. Hello, Touch.ru. How Organization of Islamic Cooperation can facilitate grain supply and other agricultural commodities from the Middle East and North Africa to stop the famine, the threat of famine. The mass media is writing so much.
Are you talking about exporting or importing?
I think that this cannot be resolved in any other way but working together with the friendly states. There are 57 of us in this organization. It is a strong, powerful organization economy-wise. We can work together with our friends, with Russia, and so on, and then we can see how can we reach this, how we can arrange supplying of food, of other commodities. The prices are growing because of the war, and one has to look for a solution by working together, first of all.
I'd like to support this approach. We've talked about this earlier today. There are two dimensions to this problem. And there's a Ukrainian grain and Russian fertilizers and grain. Those two components are the components of the so-called package deal suggested by Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres. and it was signed in Istanbul in June. This agreement consists of two parts. One relates to the exportation of Ukrainian grain, which required Kiev's assent to demine the ports, and they didn't give their consent to that for some time, but ultimately an agreement was reached that grain ships would carry out grain from those ports, and this part has been effective in ensuring the exportation of physical volumes. As to the destinations of these ships, the UN statistics provide a rather difficult picture. We see that the poorest countries, who were the subject of concern of the Secretary General when he formulated his idea, now only receive 5 to 7% of the overall volumes, and at least half of that grain is now being taken to European Union countries. And we have noted that, mentioned that to the Secretary General's office, but they cite the European countries' explanation that they do receive most of the Ukrainian grain, but then that grain is redistributed to the poorest countries. We would like to have a more detailed picture, so we requested the Secretariat and those officers who have the full view of the situation and all the data provide a more detailed information about the movement of this grain to end consumers. And this is a matter of relations between the Secretariat and the European countries, but our request was not motivated by curiosity. It really has an impact on our focus in implementing the grain deal in the future. And as to the second part, which relates to Russian fertilizer and grain, nothing has happened. 3 months have passed since the deal was signed in Istanbul. The Secretariat took upon itself to solve the problems created for Russian ships by Western sanctions that prevent them from entering ports and that prevent foreign ships from entering Russian ports. Sanctions which restrict activities of freight and insurance companies. Those are all very serious problems. I remember that a representative of the UN Secretariat mentioned a couple of days ago that the UN is working tirelessly to lift those restrictions. Working tirelessly is laudable, but we need clear legal actions to provide exemptions to those sanctions that could have an impact on the exportation of Russian grain so that our counterparties can be satisfied. And one of the key issues here is the fact that Rossellko's bank is being hit by sanctions, and it is the key institution which provides financial support for our supplies to global markets. And we'd like to have more input from the World Food Organization and from the UN agencies which are focused on providing for the needs of the poorest countries and preventing hunger in the world. And the deal lasts until November, and there is still a lot to be done. So we expect that all the issues will be resolved until talk begins of whether it needs to be renewed. And we've asked our friends from the OIC to use these arguments that I've just mentioned and that we voiced during our talks in their work with the UN Secretariat, calling upon it to take up responsibility to carry out its obligations in full.
TASS agency. I've got a question from Mr. Lavrov. Mr. Shoigu talked to his counterparts from France, the UK, and Turkey, where he expressed concerns regarding possible provocations from Ukraine using the so-called dirty bomb. In response, the UK, the US, and France, in their joint statement of their foreign ministers, they reviewed the concerns of Russia. Now the head of the foreign ministry of Ukraine said that what will Russian foreign ministry respond to these statements and what Russia will do in practical dimension? Thank you.
After the phone conversation that took place yesterday between the Minister of Defense Shoigu and his counterparts from France, Britain, and the head of the Pentagon, Austin, we took the necessary steps to raise this question on international platforms at the UN in New York in particular, and our representatives will work in this regard to ensure a deep and professional deliberation of these issues. We have specific information with regard to the research facilities in Ukraine, which do have the technology needed to manufacture this dirty bomb that we're speaking about. And we've provided information through relevant channels that these suspicions are well grounded, that these things can indeed be planned. And Minister Shoigu obtained a preliminary agreement to hold the consultations on the necessary level. We are seeing the media response by the West, which is not surprising. It is a part of the absolute support provided by the West to Zelensky, satisfying his every whim and allowing him to do everything he likes, condoning Russophobia and bombing civilian facilities, killing civilian people. As to Ukrainian Minister Kuleba, as statement that the IAEA decided to send experts, I have no information as to that. I know that Mr. Grossi received this information, that he agreed to review this information while being on a trip. We know that our Ukrainian colleagues distort facts, so that might be an example of that. And I can also say that Kuleba has said that Ukraine is acting transparently, unlike Russia. That is that's a narrative that's not very true to the case. And an example of that is the staged events in Bucha, a provocation that happened back in March, and we've addressed various parties since then, urging them to provide the names of people who were killed in Bucha and whose bodies were demonstrated to the world as a proof that the Russian military committed war crimes. A month ago, I spoke to the UN Secretary General and I asked him to ensure that a list of these victims is produced. But no response followed, and that is a great evidence of the Ukrainian approach to the issue. And as to dirty bombs, we are interested in preventing such provocations. And as to what our Western partners are saying, and far from being impartial to Zelensky's regime, I don't think it means that they will be as disregarding of this information in their private discussions as well. Thank you.
The press conference is over. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, journalists. Thank you very much.